And all this time, I thought the world was round. The world is not round. It has edges we can fall from and faces staring in entirely different directions. And I thought the world was huge, but it is not. It's in our hands. We can hold it, change it, turn it, shake it. We can solve it. But not by sheer luck or chance. We must be topped away.
Smartphones, iPads, laptops. You are most likely watching this video on one of these. After all, these are clean and smart gadgets. They were not made in the third world sweatshops to which our big box retail has outsourced the most inhumane conditions of work. But wait a minute, that glossy iPhone also has fingerprints from elsewhere on it. A few years ago, one of the workers on the global production line at a factory in China took a photograph of herself on the iPhone she was assembling. Pink and white striped uniform, peace sign, she's beaming a smile. Mark, a British consumer who bought this phone, shared her photograph with the world. She came to be known simply as iPhone Girl. But what is it that we know about iPhone Girl? Is she one of the migrant workers who fought to find a coveted spot in one of the many factories of Foxconn? Perhaps the world's largest electronics manufacturer? Did she do what model Chinese workers have always done? Swallow bitterness for the sake of a better life for the family she had left behind in rural China? Is she one of the workers who committed suicide at these factories? The workers' suicides triggered consumer outrage and led Apple to partner with the Fair Labor Association to improve wages and conditions. Are our iPhones clean again? Well, actually, our iPhones are now being assembled by robots. I guess this is one way of dealing with those pesky human workers. Here then is my first provocation, that in a global world, we do not see invisible workers. Instead, we see visible poverty. A child living in poverty flashes a brilliant smile. Sponsor a child today. Do the poor really smile this much? Here is my second provocation, that what we see in the poverty spectacle is not the effects of our consumption, but instead the poor whose lives can be saved by us. Who is the us? Those with the resources and power to sponsor a child, make a Kiva loan, donate a heifer, buy a pair of shoes so that a second pair can be given to those who are barefoot. This too is consumption. And this consumption is a relationship, at once intimate and distant, between benevolence and need, between donor and recipient. Where does this relationship take place? Increasingly in our everyday acts of shopping. And thus my question to you, can we shop to end poverty? Each week, I shop for groceries at a fancy store in Berkeley. You know the type. Fair trade goodies, organic produce, sky-high prices. Each week, I fill my grocery cart with organic peppery arugula, delicate mushrooms, and luscious fruit. Yes, I'm a foodie. And each week, the act of grocery shopping becomes the opportunity to do good. I can add $5 to my grocery bill to empower poor women a continent away. I can donate to end world hunger. I can make poverty history, quickly, conveniently, as I shop. I'm no longer just a consumer. I am now a micro-philanthropist. Let me share a confession with you. I like this feeling. I like to make micro-donations. I like to feel that these donations have an impact on poverty and that these impacts can be measured and tallied and printed on the side of recyclable grocery bags. I like the feeling. Other types of shopping also engender poverty action. Take, for example, ethical consumerism and the case of the Red campaign. Founded by U2 rock star Bono. You thought I was going to do a video without mentioning Bono? Red is premised on a simple idea. What we choose to do or even buy can affect someone's life on the other side of the world. Buy a Red product, A Dr. Dre Beats headphone, an iPod, a Converse shoe, a t-shirt, and the manufacturer makes a donation to the Global Fund, which fights disease in Africa. There is something incredibly empowering about this idea, that our purchasing power can aid someone on the other side of the world. And there is something incredibly arrogant about this idea. Who are we to save lives, to give aid? I would like to dismiss ethical consumerism, to tell you that it's bullshit, total bullshit. Poverty is not the lack of a pair of shoes, poverty is not the lack of a micro-donation, poverty is not the lack of a cow. Poverty is the violence of disempowerment. Poverty is the deprivation produced by systematic exploitation. Poverty is the long history of disinvestment in the communities of the marginalized. How can our acts of shopping enact any type of justice in the face of such injustice? But let's give this another try. We can buy products branded as ethical. We can make micro-donations while we shop. We can sponsor children in poverty. We can try to change the conditions under which global commodities are produced. Take the example of fair trade coffee. Coffee is a drink of pleasure and leisure. Yes, I know some of you think of it as a drink of necessity. It is also a multi-billion-dollar global industry controlled by a handful of multinational companies. Coffee exemplifies the absurdity of poverty in a world of prosperity. A wonderful film called Black Gold reminds us that while in North America and Europe, we happily pay hefty prices for that specialty cappuccino made just right, coffee farmers on the other side of the world earn a pittance for their hard labor of growing coffee. There's a scene in the film that I cannot get out of my head. A row of women in Ethiopia are sorting through coffee beans. It is back-breaking work, for they have to make sure that there isn't a single imperfect bean in the entire batch. Our cosmopolitan lifestyles, including that perfect cup of coffee, depend on this devalued work. Recognizing this dependency is what critical development theorist Victoria Lawson calls a relational understanding of poverty. Fair trade seeks to transform the conditions under which global commodities are produced. In the case of coffee, fair trade ensures that small farmers organized in democratically managed co-ops can gain access to global markets and secure a minimum price for their coffee. So, we may not be able to shop to end poverty, but global commodities can teach us about global interconnections, about dependencies on a world scale. One of my favorite examples comes from cultural studies theorist Stuart Hall. And this is for all of the snooty tea drinkers, myself included, who look down on coffee drinkers. Hall writes of tea, sugar, and global histories. Not a single tea plantation exists within the United Kingdom. This is the symbolization of English identity. I mean, what does anybody in the world know about an English person except that they can't get through the day without a cup of tea? Where does it come from? Ceylon, Sri Lanka, India. That is the outside history that is inside the history of the English. Global commodities can also teach us about the politics of value and skill. Many years ago, I turned to feminist scholarship to better comprehend this issue of skill. In a book titled For We Are Sold, I and My People, Maria Patricia Fernandez-Kelly provides an account of the maquiladoras of Mexico, export processing factories set up at the border to deploy cheap labor, often women workers, to produce global commodities. Women were expected to sew patch pockets on what were to become blue jeans. This so-called unskilled task required, in fact, extraordinary skill. There were no markers to guide the placement of the pocket. Workers just did it. Pockets had to be redone until they were perfect. A worker was expected to sew a pocket every 9 to 10 seconds. That is over 3,000 pockets every shift. To make what is less than a living wage. I may have a PhD, but I would not be able to sew one of those pockets, even if my life depended on it. Each global commodity then, be it a pair of jeans or a cup of coffee, carries within it a story of dependency. Does this mean then as consumers that we face a choice? Shop fair trade and fair labor and do good, or not? But there is nothing simple about doing good. To shop fair trade remains a privilege, an expensive privilege in the liberal enclaves of the global north. But the future of consumption lies elsewhere, in the prosperous economies of Brazil, China, India, where fair trade has barely made an appearance. And the impacts of our consumption on poverty cannot be reduced to a product label, however tempting it is to believe that we have saved lives, empowered women, done good. But what we can do is to understand the life history of a global commodity and advocate for changes in how it is produced, traded, and consumed. A wise UN official once stated that policy, not charity, is what rich countries can do for poor countries. So is it with consumption. I'm calling then for a shift, from that smiling figure of visible poverty waiting for our charity to the figure of the invisible worker whose labor is embedded in global commodities. For a shift from responsibility, feeling the need to help, save, give aid, to what post-colonial theorist Gayatri Spivak calls accountability, in this case being accountable for our lives as global consumers. This is more than consumption. This is mutuality, reciprocity, and even solidarity. We have made a video about ethical consumerism that cannot be viewed without today's clean and smart gadgets. To watch the video, pay attention to the fingerprints.